missile test launch just days after Washington pushes Tehran for nuclear negotiations. As the Islamic State heads for elections, what does Ahmadinejad's hardline stance mean for the region? And do his moderate challengers have any chance of beating him? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Shuli Ghosh. So the race has begun in the bid to become the next Iranian president, and campaigning is off with a bang, literally. Iran's state media said the country had successfully test-fired a mid-range surface-to-surface missile capable of reaching Israel, Southeast Europe and US bases in the Middle East. President Ahmadinejad commented on the launch during the start of his official campaign to be re-elected president on June the 12th. The move will be seen as provocative, coming as it does so soon after a meeting in Washington between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Barack Obama. Mr. Netanyahu said Iran was Israel's greatest threat. Meanwhile, President Obama, who has invited dialogue with the Iranians over their nuclear program, stressed the offer wouldn't hold forever.
The important thing is to make sure that there is a clear timetable of at which point we say these talks don't seem to be making any serious progress. It hasn't been tried before, so we don't want to prejudge that. But as I said, by the end of the year, I think we should have some sense as to whether or not these discussions are starting to yield significant benefits.
So let's examine the implications. Let me introduce our guests in Tehran. Syed Mohammad Mirandi, Professor of Political Science at the University of Tehran. In Washington, D.C., Joshua Goodman, Director of Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And in Beirut, Rami Khouri, editor of Lebanon's Daily Star newspaper and director of the Issam Fares Institute at American University of Beirut. Gentlemen, welcome to all three of you. Syed, let me start with you. Was the firing of this missile a deliberate response to the meeting in Washington between Netanyahu and Obama?
I think it basically has to do with the fact that the Israeli regime has been constantly threatening Iran with a military strike. And also, the United States has repeatedly stated that all options are on the table, which basically implies that the United States government is threatening the Iranian people with bloodshed and war. So I think the launching of the missile was to show the United States and Israel that Iran is strong and can defend itself, and to deter them from making a very grave mistake. Also a bit of a boost for Ahmadinejad's campaign? I don't really think it has a great deal to do with that. I think every time that there is a great deal of rhetoric and Israeli leaders and American leaders make threats against the country, the Iranians do show a new piece of equipment or the latest technology or something new to show them that an attack would be very unwise.
Joshua, what do you think? In Washington, D.C., has this been seen as a deliberate provocation?
Oh, I would actually agree with the previous comments. I think this was a message to the Israelis. Benjamin Netanyahu came to Washington for 2 days and lobbied all levels of U.S. government for support to take harsher action against Iran and perhaps even attack Iran. And I think the Iranian response was, we're not intimidated by your efforts, which for the most part have been unsuccessful. But I do think there was a domestic element as well, and I think some in Washington are seeing it as this. I mean, it's not a coincidence that the missile launch took place in the exact province where Ahmadinejad was launching his campaign, in his home province. So I think there was a message there that Ahmadinejad was trying to send both domestically and to the world, that he is a strong, powerful leader, and that he should not be, that he will not be intimidated by any efforts abroad to stall the Iranian nuclear program. Okay, Rami, I'm wondering how the Arab states in the region will also look at this. Is there concern amongst neighbouring states in the region about the timing of this particular missile launch?
Well, there's concern among the Arab governments throughout most of the Arab world about the continued technological development and political defiance that define the Iranian regime. And the people of the Arab world, by and large, the majority of Arab citizens, like to see Iran technologically advanced and politically defiant in the face of Israeli and American threats. So you have a very mixed situation in the Arab world, and this is getting worse and worse with the continued tensions that are generated in the relationship between the Arab world and the U.S. and Iran, especially by Israeli provocations, such as we had in Washington, trying to drive a wedge between the Arab people and the Iranian people. So you have very mixed signals between leaders and people in the Arab world vis-a-vis Iran and vis-a-vis Israel and the West.
Well, what about the domestic timing of this, the fact that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was able to refer to this launch during his opening campaign?
Well, I think this is perfectly normal in the Iranian context. You have a very spirited election now with 4 major candidates in Iran, and it's completely in line with what the Iranians have done for the last 10, 15 years, which is keep developing their technology, keep responding to American and Israeli threats with defiance and resistance. And there's nothing unusual about this. And I think it's important for the Americans and the Israelis, as well as the Iranians, to decide if they're trying to negotiate coexistence and security for everybody, or if they want to play hardball and to threaten each other. You have a very schizophrenic situation now among these 3 actors, and the Arabs are sitting around watching this on TV because they're nowhere to be seen, unfortunately.
OK, well, let's take a closer look at the candidates. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is running against 3 other men for president. Mir Mohsen Rezai is the former head of Revolutionary Guards. Like Ahmadinejad, he's conservative, but it's thought unlikely he'll pull many votes away from the president. Former Prime Minister Mir Hossein Mousavi is backed by ex-President Mohammad Khatami. He's a reformist who's open to dialogue with the West, and he's seen as Ahmadinejad's strongest challenger. The third candidate is Mahdi Karoubi, former Speaker of Parliament and considered the most reformist of all. He's promised to adopt a policy of détente with other countries. Joshua, does Washington or even Israel think a change of leadership in Iran will change Iran's foreign policies?
No, they don't. I think from Washington's perspective and from Israel's perspective, and I think from anybody in the West perspective, the decision-making on the nuclear issue lies with the supreme leader himself. And any president, regardless of who the president is, will not change that. The final decision will be made by Ayatollah Khamenei, and it will not be made by whether it's President Ahmadinejad or potentially President Mousavi. That's not going to change the actual course in which Iran travels. What will change is the manner in which the dialogue or the negotiations are handled. Obviously, President Ahmadinejad has a more belligerent rhetoric. He has been more antagonistic towards the West with his inflammatory speeches. Whereas President Mousavi would have, I think, a more nuanced, a more cultured approach to the issue. It would be presented more as a person who one can talk with. And so I would argue from an American and from an Israeli perspective, the best result is President Ahmadinejad, because President Ahmadinejad represents the threat that they perceive the Iranian nuclear program to be. He embodies exactly what they're trying to counter. And so I think if you're looking at from over here, the hope is that President Ahmadinejad succeeds again so that you have this physical embodiment of the challenge that lays ahead.
Syed, let me take up that point with you. Joshua saying that the real political power in Iran, of course, is the supreme leader. I mean, what influence is he having on the political campaign and the direction that Iran is moving in?
Well, I think that the president would be important. The Supreme National Security Council in Iran takes the decision with regards to major issues such as relations with the United States, the nuclear program, and so on. But at the end of the day, the most influential person, as he pointed out, would be the leader. All 4 candidates have strong links with him, and he has said that basically what he is looking for is a high turnout. It would seem that President Ahmadinejad looks more to the Middle East, Central Asia, and to the Indian subcontinent, to the populations in this region. And perhaps former Prime Minister Mousavi is looking a bit more towards the West in the rhetoric that he uses. But in general, I think that you will see continuity in Iranian foreign policy, and issues linked to the nuclear program and to the United States and Iran's views with regards to Israel. Iran, all four candidates believe that Israel is not a legitimate state and an apartheid state. In all these regards, they are quite similar to one another.
OK, well, let's have a look at what the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has been saying. He's urged Iranians to support anti-West candidates without explicitly naming Ahmadinejad. He said, "Do not let those who would surrender to enemies and harm our nation's prestige get into office." Rami, isn't it fairly clear that Khamenei is supporting Ahmadinejad?
Well, there's mixed views on that. He's made some statements in the last 6 months that seem to support Ahmadinejad, and he's also made statements that make him seem to be rather neutral. But in the final analysis, I think the most important person in terms of the Iranian policies is actually the American president. The manner in which the United States addresses Iran and engages it in politics and diplomacy is going to determine the reaction that you get from the Iranians. Internally in Iran, they've been very consistent. They're going ahead with their enrichment. They're not succumbing to pressures or threats. They're developing their missile technology, and they insist that it's for peaceful purposes. The West needs to engage them and call their bluff on that, to make sure that it is all peaceful, but at the same time engage them on the basis of one law applying to all nations, that if they have rights, they should be able to implement them. So American policies, more than anything else, I think, or the tone and the manner of American talking and diplomacy will determine what kind of reaction you get from Iran, keeping in mind that the Iranian people don't like to be shoved around any more than the Iranian leadership. And we saw when Obama changed his tone very intelligently, I think very wisely, the Iranians started to respond in kind. And I think they need to keep going down that road of diplomatic engagement.
Yeah, but Joshua, do you think Obama's diplomatic tone has changed somewhat? Because after that meeting with Netanyahu, he seemed to become a bit tougher. He set a deadline.
Well, he avoided setting a deadline for harsher action. The concept that
he certainly set a deadline for a positive response, didn't he? End of the year is what he said.
End of the year, he said he would like a response by the end of the year. But that, I mean, that's not a tight deadline. That's giving Iran, that's giving the process 6 to 7 months. But he avoided setting a timetable for action, which is what Prime Minister Netanyahu came to Washington to get. And I think if we're looking at if the culprit is American rhetoric here, I find it very odd that Iran would launch a missile at a time when President Obama has made a great effort to soften his tone towards Iran, to create a new environment to build bridges, and then and even avoid conceding points to the Israelis during their meeting, and not following and issuing similar rhetoric to that of Prime Minister Netanyahu. And what does Iran do the next day? They have a missile test, which is obviously an antagonistic move. So I don't know how much, I would challenge how much the rhetoric of the president actually affects Iranian policymaking.
But in fact, I mean, Joshua, there is a suggestion that Israel has kind of thrown down the gauntlet to Obama. The suggestion being that if he doesn't stop Iran, then the Israelis will. There's even a rumor that Israel asked permission from the US to be able to launch a bombing raid on Iran whilst it was in the middle of the Gaza war. I don't know how much credence there is to that, but is there this sort of relationship where Israel is trying to push the US into doing something?
Well, we have to understand that from the Israeli perspective, the Iranian nuclear program is an existential question. It's an existential threat to their, and so they view it that way. And there can be no accepting an Iranian nuclear weapon. Whereas for the U.S., it would be a major strategic blow, but it is not at this stage, and given the development of Iranian weapons, it is not an existential question to the U.S. right now. So obviously there's a greater sense of urgency in Israel than there is in the U.S. Israel's point is that if the U.S. cannot stop the Iranian nuclear program through peaceful measures or even military measures, Israel will take action when it feels the time is right, or when it feels they're at that moment of last resort.
OK, let's see what Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has to say about all this. He's actually made it very clear, we're not surprised, that he's sceptical about President Obama's stance towards Iran.
Some people say this man has brought many changes and done many important things. I say, what changes are you talking about? What policies has he changed? What important decisions has he made? We are still waiting for the changes.
Let me reintroduce our guests to you. In Tehran, we have Syed Mohammed Marandi. In Beirut, Rami Houri from the Islam Faroes Institute, and Joshua Goodman in the middle there from Washington, D.C. Rami, how wary are Iranians about U.S. intentions?
Oh, I think they take the U.S. Rhetoric very seriously when the U.S. keeps repeating that nothing is off the table and we should know by the end of the year. This is pretty serious stuff. And when they say that it's not in Iran's national security interest to develop nuclear capabilities, they understand what that means. So I think people take the United States seriously, especially when it has 200,000 soldiers and multiple drone Predator missiles airplanes flying around the region killing people. So people take it very seriously. But I think the important thing is Ahmadinejad was right at one level, that the U.S. has changed its tone very clearly and has made little policy changes. It's willing to sit and talk with the Iranians and negotiate without the Iranians stopping enrichment. So there is a little bit of a shift, but it's not a major, huge policy shift yet. And I think we need to see if the U.S. is prepared to go one step further, and the Iranians will respond to that. The American rhetoric change will bring about an Iranian rhetoric change, but you don't expect the Iranians to stop developing their technology because the Americans started using different words. We can't mix apples with oranges, and this is the whole point of the Iranian position, why so many people in the Middle East like the Iranians, because they insist on being treated by a single standard of law and morality and politics, and they won't be bossed around, and they're willing to negotiate, but not under unilateral threats and pressures from Americans or Israelis.
Syed, I wonder how ordinary people in Iran are reacting to all the rhetoric that we're hearing, Iran's foreign policy decisions. I mean, how is that impacting on voters?
Well, I think that for the most part, Iranians do support Iran's policy towards the Palestinians and the state support for the people in Gaza, and that in general Iranians again support the nuclear program, basically because it's an issue of it's become an issue of national pride, but also because the International Atomic Energy Agency has said time and time again that there has never been any evidence to show that Iran's program has been anything but peaceful. With regards to these issues, I don't think that any of the candidates will be very different. They all support the rights of Palestine. They all believe that Israel is a racist regime, and they all support the nuclear program. The basic issue here, I think, will be the economy and how well this administration has performed during the last 4 years. That is probably the basic issue that people will be discussing, and during the coming days, as the four candidates will be holding debates with one another on a daily basis on television, people will be watching and deciding. Do you agree with Rami, Syed, that Iran's position that it takes is popular in the region? Yes, I've noticed that as well. I think that that is one reason why the president sometimes uses this rhetoric, because he knows that the people of the region and the Iranians like to be seen to be strong in the face of the Americans, and the people of the region like to see someone stand up to the Americans. I don't think that any of the candidates want hostility with any country, and the president's opposition to Israel, like other previous Iranian leaders, is basically that Israel should allow all Palestinians to return to Palestine, and that Israel must cease to exist as a racist entity.
Let me
but
just
I think that the
I
fact
want
that
to
he is
look
willing.
at that particular point a little further, just because it's interesting that this is what the US Secretary of State had to say about Arab reaction to Iran's nuclear program. She said Israel and some of her Arab neighbours had allied themselves against a common enemy, making the prospect of a Palestinian solution more likely. Take a listen.
But we think that this coalition against Iran is a great opportunity to assist in achieving the two-state solution. We're not linking them. We're not saying they're dependent.
What she is saying is that neighbouring Arab states will actually ally with Israel because the fear of Iran is so great. Joshua, is that a credible US hope? My enemy's enemy is my friend?
Yeah, yes, I think it is. Over the past few years, we've heard spatterings of reports about Arab cooperation with Israel over the Iranian issue. We can think specifically about the GCC+2, Jordan and Egypt, having meetings and in some way interacting with Israel and interacting with the U.S. There has been a hope in the Bush administration and in the Obama administration to build this sort of this Arab network of support against Iran and drive them closer to Israel as their main ally in the region, all in a common defense against what they perceive to be the Iranian threat.
But hasn't Iran been trying to play a bigger role in regional politics? I mean, it's offered to intervene in Pakistan and Iraq, for example.
Well, it's playing a bigger role in regional politics, but from many of the Sunni Arab states, it's playing a very disruptive role in politics and one that works counter to their interests. Iran is playing obviously a stronger role in Iraqi politics, but it is doing so by supporting Shia groups, particularly Shia insurgent groups, and funding the Shia insurgency, which is destabilizing Iraq and is threatening the Sunni population in Iraq itself. So they are playing a bigger role, and that's precisely the issue for these states, is that Iran is, they have the perception that Iran has this hegemonic ambition for the region, and it comes at their expense.
Rami, what do you think? As the rhetoric continues, is there a fear in the region about where this might go?
Well, first, the comment about Hillary Clinton and the American hope for Arab-Israeli alliance against Iran, this is slightly hallucinogenic. I mean, this is real fantasy stuff, and it's completely unrealistic. Alexander Haig and Reagan were talking about this in the early 1980s, and it just won't happen. The reality is Iran is developing greater and greater links with governments and popular public opinion in the Arab world and movements like Hamas and Hezbollah. So Iran's links are increasing, not decreasing, and the impact of governments in many Arab countries is shrinking. Many governments are losing credibility and influence even in their own countries. So I think what is needed is a more realistic accommodation between the reality of Israel, the reality of Iran, and the U.S. interests and Arab interests all together, and Turkish interests. And this is what Obama, I think, has been trying to do. We need to give him a lot of credit for the courage in which he very quickly turned around the rhetoric and the body language of American interaction with Iran and the region. So I think we need to keep looking at the diplomatic opportunities rather than stoking the fires of fear and existential concerns. I mean, the idea that Iran would attack Israel with nuclear missiles is completely hallucinogenic. I mean, it's out of the realm of any reality. Anybody who talks about this is really repeating Israeli propaganda, which is Israeli propaganda, not realistic action by reasonable people. We need to look at these countries, Israel, Iran, more realistically in terms of their rights.
I wish we could continue this discussion further, but I'm afraid we've run out of time. Gentlemen, thank you all very much indeed. Syed Mohammed Marandi, Joshua Goodman and Rami Khoury. And that's it from us. Thank you for watching Inside Story. If you have any comments, then email us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. For the moment, from me, Shuli Ghosh. Bye-bye.